Thanks very much. It's good to be with you. I do a little bit of traveling. I love the coming in on the wing thing. That's very nice, rather than pulling a muscle at my age. This is not a good thing. So a couple of things to pick up on. One of them, John mentioned there is a home office, and we're a virtual organization, so it's been interesting to learn kind of how to manage in a virtual environment. It can be done. I don't know if I'm doing it effectively, but it can be done. I could assure you of that. And we've had this invasion. We've got our youngest daughter. We have two daughters. The youngest daughter and her husband, they're moving to this little Catholic school in Indiana in South Bend, so you'll have new residents. I think it's Notre Dame. He's taking a faculty appointment there. So they're between houses. They were just outside of Pittsburgh. So my wife flew up there, helped them kind of pack. They have three kids, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. 2-year-old is the only girl and rules the roost, just so you know. So then they came back. So they've been in the house. So literally, I moved my office into our bedroom because the kids have commandeered the desk. I go up there in the morning, and there are all of these little sticky tabs all over the place. I've got a whiteboard in there. There are cartoon drawings and letters, but it's been fun. But it's great to be with you. I have to say, the biggest smile that I've seen today, and there she sits, was Mary Ellen, who heard me when I went to get my registration badge and came out, and there's this big smile. My God, he made it. So I want to thank her, and I want to thank Trish and the USG folks, because last year I was invited to the meeting to present, but the invitation was made when I was still at SREB. So the fact that I moved in March actually, of last year, so before this meeting, but the invitation, so the deal had been struck. Well, he's still kind of an SREB guy. They didn't have to ask me back this year, and they did, so it's good to feel that I'm still kind of part of this family, and you guys have done a great job. So, what is he going to speak on? So you're getting a little promotional piece on some work that we're doing with the Sloan Consortium, a little bit about the Sloan Consortium and our quality scorecard. And John mentioned, actually, I just got a license for Rosetta Stone because I'm spending so much time in South America, Latin America. A little project, I'll tell you about that. It's interesting, we stand around and you engage with people kind of in the hallway and at breaks at meetings. Well, when they're doing it in a language that you don't understand, you don't know if they're talking about you, the weather, soccer match, football, whatever. So I'm going to brush up on Spanish, which is long lost. But I'm going to spend some time talking about Sloan Consortium, some time talking about our quality scorecard. I think it was something that was in your packet. I'm going to tell you where we're going with that. But I'm certainly open because John and I spent an hour after I got here talking about state authorization and some challenges with state authorization. That's still very much on our plate. And MOOCs, I'm sorry I missed Houston Davis's remarks today. The meeting, actually, if it was in DC, I probably would have driven back here, but it was in New York, so that was part of the problem. But even in this meeting yesterday, I got a question about, well, the University System of Georgia just made some announcement about MOOCs. What can you tell us about it? And I said, I don't know the details yet. So John was filling me in, and I'm sorry that I didn't have an opportunity to hear Houston, but I will catch up with him. In fact, I think it was at this meeting last year we decided we were going to have a power lunch in Atlanta, and we still haven't had a power lunch in Atlanta. So let me give you 30 seconds on the Sloan Consortium. We are a nonprofit professional society, about 20 years old. Probably have run across our materials at some point in time. Our focus has been on the kind of integration of online learning into the mainstream of higher education. And I'm going to throw up a couple of slides from an annual survey study that we do that suggests that we're getting there. We're not there yet. Although this is being kind of pushed now pretty dramatically by the MOOC movement, MOOC hysteria, MOOC I'm not quite sure what to call it, but it's a driver. In fact, I would just make this one comment about MOOCs. I made this comment maybe to John earlier, so I apologize, John, if you're hearing warmed over stuff from the last half hour of conversation. If you're in the online learning business, and most of you are in some way, shape, or form at your institutions, or certainly in serving adults, the front page of Time magazine in October a year ago was Heaven Sent. All about online learning, 150,000 students in Sebastian Thrun's artificial intelligence course. And it opened it up, our world, online world, to a much broader scope. So we start having major editorial writers, Thomas Friedman writing about MOOCs. Someone said to me, Thomas has children. Ask him if he's in fact going to have his sons and daughters go to school with MOOCs. No, they'll probably be at Princeton or Yale or Harvard or wherever they're going to be, although they're offering MOOCs, which is interesting in its own right. The challenge, however, is this, as I said, this sword that has two sides. So now we have the public engaged and energized thinking about MOOCs as being online. And I think you would probably agree that's probably the worst example of online learning that we could provide to people, to say there is good quality online learning. The dilemma that we have is, how do you then say to the Princetons, the MITs, the Stanfords, the UVAs of the world, the USG institutions of the world, MOOCs aren't really good online learning. That is in fact a challenge. Now we've got to change the mindset, if you will, of a public that thinks, wow, look at all these institutions doing all this online stuff, and of too many legislators and policymakers who are saying, you see, we can do this for free. It's not an issue. We just roll this stuff out, and institutions can do it for free. Person I was working with at UVA, they were offering 5 courses. They developed 5 courses. I'm sure they topped well over $1 million plus in developing those 5 courses. She said, we gave faculty full release time to develop the courses. The decision at the highest levels of the university was, if we're doing a MOOC, we're going to do it with UVA quality. So we got high-def cameras. We surrounded the faculty with all of these resources and evaluation specialists and designers, and they did all of this work, and they got 230,000 or 240,000 students enrolled in the 5 MOOCs. She said, we've not collected a single penny from any of those students, and the postscript is, these folks think that they're UVA students. And we had her speaking to a group, and she said, and so here's how this plays out. We're getting requests from students saying, I'm a UVA student. I'd like to get access to football tickets. I'm a student. I can't reach the faculty member. Can you give me his home phone number? No one's responding. I forgot my password. I have this situation I need to tell you about. The students think they're students. And so we have this challenge now of looking at the percentage of folks who are finishing MOOCs. And I'm going to get back to my other topic, but this MOOC stuff is just too exciting. Now we're getting beat about the head and shoulders by 7% of students who are enrolling in MOOCs are completing. They're not courses yet. We're making them courses. And if they had not been called MOOCs, if they'd been called MOOLI or MOOLA, massive open online learning experiences or learning activities, we probably could have gotten away with this. But as soon as you put a C on the end of a MOOC, it's become academic. Can you get credit? Who gives credit? Are there alternative strategies for getting credit and so forth? So again, I'm sorry I missed Houston's remarks earlier today. So now you've had a chance to look at all these kind of things that we do. We are driven by a business model, if you will. Our relationship with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation ends this year. So we must take a wing, if you will, on our own, and we'll be fine. We're going to make it. A nice little collage slide of a whole host of things. So you might have run into one or more of these. We have 3 major conferences that we do every year. The largest one usually, well, always is in Orlando in October or November, the International Conference on Online Learning. We've had several folks from USG institutions participate in now entering its 5th year in something called the Institute for Emerging Leadership and Online Learning, a collaboration with Penn State University. We've got 140 graduates of that program. The idea is, and I'm exhibit 1, none of us are getting any younger. There will be a new cadre of leaders needed in education and in online learning, and if Sloan continues to do its work, this integrated notion of learning. And these young and maybe not so young folks are going to be coming through a different path to leadership positions than most of us did. So we played the faculty game, and then we kind of moved into administration, and we bounced around in the academic nomad land that we are in, and then moved into some type of administrative positions. Many of the younger folks that are coming out now are not faculty members. They're moving directly into e-learning or online learning or distance learning, by whichever term you like, and their pathway into leadership is quite different. So we've launched this program. We've had a call to do this internationally, not yet in Latin America, but that's probably coming. We do have a referee journal called JALN, Journal of Asynchronous Learning Networks. That's why we call it JALN. Asynchronous Learning Networks is a term of the past. And I'm going to now turn to something that we've done now for 10 years. This started 10 years ago when the simple question was asked, well, who's doing what in online learning? You could not get your hands on numbers. And so with a grant from the foundation, Sloan C began the task of working with a group called the Babson Survey Research Group to publish an annual report. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let me get this out of the way. And then I'll turn to these slides, these graphics. The central focus of our work over the 20 years has been built on something we call the Sloan C pillars, the pillars of quality. So we've got publications that surround this, and these 5 pillars then kind of set up the work that we do dealing with student, faculty, access questions, cost effectiveness, which is in fact now moved into the environment of scale, which is a huge issue, and then overall learning effectiveness. And so you get a sense of kind of the direction that we're going in with something we call the quality scorecard. So this has kind of framed our work. The decision was made well before I got involved with the organization that if we're going to do this in an academic setting, then you do it on a research basis. So almost everything that you see, save one component that I'll mention momentarily, in fact, is based upon whatever existing research there is out there. And that includes the quality scorecard that I will turn to in a couple of minutes. The one piece that isn't is the section of our activity, which is actually one of the more popular ones, called last ship, called effective practice. That's great. Called effective practices. It's popular because we do in fact, well, it's not research based, there is a review process. What we're trying to do is to put out and make available to institutions exemplars of activities and challenges that you're facing, and institutions that have addressed these challenges effectively. We make this available through effective practices. So, annual report, 2012. It was the 10th report. So we asked Jeff Seaman, who's the primary researcher on this, there it is, to give us a sense of what's happened over a 10-year period. I've only picked a couple of the slides from the report. If you've not seen the report, you should download it. Available free of charge off the website. This one people like to see. So if in fact our work is focused on the integration of online or e-learning into the mainstream of higher education, we are getting there, folks. With roughly, 22 million college and university students in the U.S. in fall of 11. We are running upwards of just under 7 million of them taking at least one online course. And a further data point is 2 million of these are only taking courses online. 2 million of the 22 million are exclusively learning online, and we know from the data that many of them are adult learners, which I know is the focus of your attention. So, nice backdrop. Whatever's happening out there with online is, in fact, working and having an impact. Good slide here. Is it critical? So we asked chief academic officers of roughly 3,000 institutions that are responding to this survey, both public, including public, private, and for-profit institutions. Is this online education, online learning activity critical to your long-term strategy? And you can see back in the first year it was under 50%, and it's pushed its way up to 70%. So even the leadership now of our institutions believe that it's important. And then you see this bottom line of 10%. Most of those are private institutions, and many of them are mission-driven, kind of single-purpose institutions, which is a little bit different challenge for them. But clearly this direction is that it's important. Now, degrees are up. We were course-based, course-oriented in the, if you will, the early days of the traditional online learning activities. We've been calling it that now. You can see where we are, where the focus has shifted now clearly to programs in 2012. But now let me get around to this notion of quality. Again, central to the work of the Sloan Consortium. But are there still concerns about quality? Yes. So we poll institutional leaders. Is it somewhat inferior? That's the gray, or inferior in the red. It is down from upwards of 42, 43% down to the mid-20s. Still not good enough. Still the challenge. We still have got the naysayers out there that you can't do this and you can't do it well. So we're working on that last 25%. We'll get there. Quality scorecard. Title of the talk, running out of time, and he finally gets to the quality scorecard. It's in the packet, yes. And what we did is we gave you a shortened version of the scorecard. This actually was work that was done by a doctoral student, now Dr. Kay Shelton, at the University of Nebraska, and she had been involved with Sloan C and then became much more involved with her. She used a Delphi format. They got 70 or so folks. In fact, I think there were a couple of Georgians in that group, in a repeated kind of survey approach in panels to create the work that I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about here. And Kay is now working with us in terms of the scorecard, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about that in a moment. The concept is a fairly simple one. Its application's a little bit more difficult, a little more challenging. We're trying to give institutions a tool to measure programs, online programs, either specific online programs or the breadth of your online programming at institutions. It is not course-based. You want to do something course-based, Quality Matters. There are some other tools out there. We have a relationship with Quality Matters. In fact, they do a series of workshops in our workshop series. So we were really trying to look at this primarily for institutions that had programs. We've seen some benefit actually accrue for institutions to use this tool in conceptualizing online programs, to essentially use the tool to help them define what they should be doing with respect to new programs. There are 70 quality indicators across 9 categories. I'm going to go through the categories very, very quickly. but a couple of the really salient points about this, which I think make it a little bit different than probably some of the other tools that are available out there. I mentioned a few minutes ago, everything is research-based. This is indeed research-based as well. There's a rationale for why each of those 70 indicators is listed. There is a literature basis to each of those. There are recommendations that institutions can follow or not follow if they wish on achieving success. And we even give you exemplars, back to this kind of effective practices notion. We give you exemplars, I'll give you one example here, of how in fact you might address that particular indicator. Why do we need this? Because there really are not a lot of great tools available for assessing what you're doing in your online programs. The original intent, and to this day the intent is that this would be a tool that you could use, that could be self-administered. What has happened is we've discovered that we can go beyond just the self-administration, and there's some real interest on the part of the accrediting community. I'm sorry I missed Bell's remarks yesterday, but when we've talked to accrediting associations and we've talked to state authorization folks, they actually like the concept of institutions using this. And in fact, in a couple of instances, I know within SAC's, Commission on Colleges, they've used the tool, written the report as part of their institutional reaffirmation. So there is a connection between the accreditation responsibilities and state authorization requirements. Again, research-based and thus replicable. Value, self-study, again. I mentioned the strategic planning and benchmarking, and I'll get back to benchmarking a little bit. If you're not benchmarking, you need to be. It's kind of like our annual survey. It was good to do the first one. It's even better to do 10 of them because now we have a real foundation upon which to measure kind of where things stand. I'll go through the categories quickly. Again, you have these in your materials. Institutional support, issues relating to governance, policy, strategic value and importance. Section, and the numbers are the number of indicators within each of these sections. So it starts to give you some sense of the value, if you will, the percentage, and you can see there's a lot with course design and instructional development, and a couple of it, but technology support, course structure, access to services, tech support, teaching and learning 5, social and student engagement. Remember what I said early on, we've got MOOCs, they're out there. This is high quality stuff. We don't know how you can get to high quality if you are not, in fact, providing the tools for engagement with students. Communication, faculty to student, student to student. Faculty support and student support. 17 of the indicators relate directly to student support. You can have the best faculty prepared and developing the best courses, but if you do not have that backdrop of an institutional level support service, it's going to certainly impact pretty negatively the quality of what you are trying to get done in that instructional activity. And then evaluation and assessment tools. Big issue of course retention, which is a factor for us and a big factor for the MOOCs, as we talked about. There's a scoring rubric. 3 to 0. So 70 times 3, 210 is the maximum number of points. The intent of this is not only to do the assessment, but to collect the kinds of materials to support what the institution is in fact doing in the assessments that they are making. And in some instances, when you're down to 1 or 0, insufficiently observed or not observed, it's not that you haven't seen it, it's that it doesn't exist or it's very limited. So if you're asking a question about some aspect of faculty development or faculty support and you don't have that, that is in fact going to kind of pop up as a problem, so you're going to get a 0 or 1 there. So there's the perfect score, and we've laid out some percentages, but ultimately you can use this to the extent that you wish And again, I'll mention in a few minutes how we've kind of turned a corner on this. Sometimes the button works and some doesn't. So there's just one page, one screenshot. Just to kind of give you an example of how we tie a specific indicator through to some assessment. Under institutional support, number 2 talks about student authentication. Still an issue. In fact, I don't know if Bell talked about this yesterday, but the accrediting stance on this is the feds have said, we'll let the accreditors handle it. The accreditors have said, you tell us how you are, in fact, authenticating. So that's the policy. There is, in fact, in our indicators, policies and guidelines are in place to authenticate that students enrolled in online courses and receiving college credit are indeed those completing the coursework. There's a tie to where did that come from? That came from the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008. How many people knew that? I didn't know that, by the way. I knew it came from someplace. The feds did something, but it came out of HEOA in 2008. It is, in fact, a requirement of the land, if you will. Here is some additional, I don't want you to read this. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how all of these things, in fact, get connected. What it, in fact, requires you to do. So an institution can say, we don't have a policy. Here are the kinds of things that you, in fact, need to be doing. And the policy says you must make clear in writing that you have these processes. And then we provide you a set of recommendations for how you, in fact, can start to address that particular challenge of authentication. Those are 3. There are others that will be added. This thing, as a tool, is about 1.5 years old, and we're working on version 2 or 1.2, whichever term you want to use. And there's a 1.2s that I'll talk about here in a moment. Spanish. It's available free. You've got it. But if you, in fact, wanted to get access to it, there's a URL for it. There is a handbook that provides all the documentation I just showed you is in a handbook, and that is available. There's a little hook there while we provide free of charge the 70 indicators in the material that I gave you. The handbook requires that you be either an individual or institutional member. There are several institutions in Georgia that are members. And there is also an interactive scorecard. I mentioned benchmarking. One of the great ways to benchmark is to utilize this interactive tool. That's available to anyone who has an institutional membership. It allows you to repose your materials on the website and then provides you an opportunity to compare what you're doing with other institutions that have also reposed into the interactive or virtual scorecard. So a nice little tool. And there it is. Provides for artifacts of support, some justification notes, and then allows you to do some comparative analysis on results. We've moved into the certification business. We've had our first test where we have put a team together that used the quality scorecard, used the interactive tool, and we had a team of 3 who then evaluated the institution's evaluation of themselves. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to do a self-study. We do self-studies for the Commission on Colleges. But if you just did the self-study, you would say, well, everything is great, this is good. Someone, a team that's going to come in and look at that self-study and say, okay, are you really doing this? Has this in fact happened? Can you support the assessment that you've made of yourself? So the movement here is to a certification. We've tested it now with a couple of institutions. It is working, and it is really set up what I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment. This kind of stamp of approval from the Sloan Consortium for institutions that have in fact used the quality scorecard and in fact had the external review assessment. So we're going to score your scoring, if you will. That's essentially what that amounts to. Let me spend just a couple of minutes to talk about how we're starting to expand this. Certainly within the U.S., and again, as I said, we're working on kind of version 1.2 of this. We see this as a tool that is going to change pretty quickly, and not maybe dramatically, but things happen in our industry, and we need to stay abreast of those, and so adjustments, in fact, will be made over time. It's like good software. We'll go to the next version. The international interest in this is significant for a couple of reasons. One, they do not have the same kind of accrediting process that we have. Ours is, quote unquote, voluntary and private. I mean, the Commission on Colleges is not a public entity. They're a private organization, and we've opted to utilize their services and pay dues and so forth to them, which is fine. I don't have any problems with our accrediting system. Well, I do have a few problems, but it's getting better. Let me just leave it at that. Most of the countries outside of the U.S. do the accreditation process through their ministries of education, which essentially become regulatory entities, and they use the term accredit. It's also the case that most of the countries, particularly in Latin America, they're about where we were 10 or 12 years ago in this online environment. That is to say, there are skeptics. Remember the chart? A lot of skeptics, maybe fewer skeptics now. A lot of skeptics. Very few of the countries would allow a student to take all of his or her coursework online. Almost all of them require that you do some kind of work in academic centers. You go to a place. And they're not quite sure just how to deal with both institutions and also the ministries, how to deal with this tough challenge to crack of quality and quality assurance. So either they found us or we found them, whatever the case may be. We found each other, let's put it that way. And so the model that is emerging is to take the base of the quality scorecard and then let specific countries or regions, in fact, start to add to that dimension. So we've just completed about 8 weeks. It's been longer than that, but the intensive work has been going on for about 8 weeks, taking a process that exists for Latin America and somehow integrating this, language challenges and all, into the scorecard. There's a group down in Latin America called CALED, a process that they've established to evaluate what they use the term distance learning. We are in the final throes of creating this joint document that will in fact be utilized in Latin America. They're very interested in getting to the point of having teams go in and visit. So if you know Spanish, I want to talk to you afterwards. Of going in and evaluating these institutions, and they want to then take the certification and hand it to the ministry. So they want to say to the ministry, we have used this external assessment tool and process. We've been reviewed against these standards that in fact embrace the standards that you as a ministry have set out for our country and our institutions. And here's the report, here's the validation. So we're working on the final, as I said, final throes of that. I had the opportunity to be in Palestine last summer. My wife said, "We're going where?" I said, "We're going to Palestine." And just so you know, it was as safe a place as I've been. The hospitality was exceptional. It was a great learning experience. She got to swim, quote unquote, in the Dead Sea. I haven't seen it yet, but they've got the same challenge. Their challenge is their students can't move around. They can't get faculty to institutions, they can't get students to institutions. And so they've said, then let's see if we can kind of move this e-learning or online learning initiative forward to create far greater access. Great concept. They're ready to do this. The Ministry of Higher Education says, wait a minute, we're not sure about this online stuff, and you still have to have essentially a blended model. So the approach that we're using in Palestine is a little bit different. I'm going over there in August. They're going to deputize me. That's honestly, they use the term, we're going to deputize you. You're going to sit down with the Ministry of Education, and we're going to deputize you to go out and visit 8 or 9, I guess, universities that are part of their system that are using online learning, essentially then to embed within the ministry the fundamentals of what we're trying to do with the scorecard. So a couple of different variations on the theme, but all of them, in fact, driving us more and more towards a broader establishment of the scorecard, which is in keeping, in fact, with what we talked to the board about doing internationally. So why, other than the fact that you got my little paid commercial on some of the things that we're doing with Sloan C, is this of importance or value to you? Because, if you go back to those slides, many of those students who are engaged in online learning are adult learners. They're your adult learners. And there are probably going to be more and more of them with the MOOC craze not dying down. And the strategies that most of you are using to reach these students involve some form of online learning, not exclusively. Maybe you have blended models, but to reach them. So I'm going to encourage you to use the free tool. Now, if you wanted to use the other stuff, that's great, but use the tool. Do these assessments. We'll be more than happy to kind of take a peek over your shoulder, if you wish, with respect to the evaluation of not only your online programs, but in particular a real interest in trying to get you to use the tool to assess those programs where you're reaching the adult degree completion market in particular. Whether you want to use this as a tool for getting into new programs, I would leave that to you. At some point in time, if this thing continues to play out the way we would like it to play out, this certification can become a differentiator for you. We're continuing our efforts to work with the accrediting community who see value. They've in fact suggested the use of the tool to some of their institutions that have larger, more significant online programming. And as I've talked to states, and I still have a lot of engagement with states primarily through the National Reciprocity, the SARA effort, they like the idea of having some level of certification for institutions. So we're going to continue to work with those folks as that evolves or emerges. So I'm going to stop there. We've got a few minutes for questions. I'm more than happy to talk about SARA, SECRA, which is the regional effort within SREB. Be happy to talk about the Boston Bruins, who are up on this. Not a lot of hockey fans here, but other parts of the world there are. And any questions that you might have about Sloan C, the scorecard, its use, I'm at your disposal. Stunned silence. We have a taker.
Hi. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. My question is this. If the tendency is towards moving, or the direction, like you pointed out, is towards accreditation, would that be done by SACS, COC, or would that be done by Sloan C? In other words, do you envision the possibility of a new accrediting agency?
No, we don't.
Okay, and the last part before you answer, would the MOOCs programs be required to go through the certification program as well? Or what if they elect not to? Would that invalidate the need for other programs to pursue that route? Thank you.
Thanks. Good questions. On the first, we are not an accreditor, don't want to become an accreditor. We simply want to provide tools that can help the accrediting community. And in particular, institutions that are challenged with responding to regional or national accrediting agencies, organizations, to have you document the quality of particularly your online program. It's interesting, and the Commission on Colleges and SACS has said this, they've had a particular interest and focus on online learning in terms of overall institutional evaluation review for the last several years, in part because a lot of institutions have been adding online programming. So that's been a particular interest or focus of the Commission over the last several years, certainly since Bell came into her leadership position. On MOOCs, a couple of ways, John, we could kind of pick up on this conversation we were having earlier. For most of the MOOC activity right now, it would be kind of off the charts of both the accrediting community and also the state authorization community. So if I can use the term, the standard, and I realize the standard changed, the standard MOOC, Sebastian Thrun offers his artificial intelligence course initially through Stanford, but now through Udacity. We all can register for it. We don't pay anything for it. We don't get any credit for it directly from anyone. It would be kind of off the plane of assessment, if you will, or dealing with accreditation. The game changers are things such as what is happening with USG and the other states that are involved, the Georgia Tech degree program, some of the efforts, ACE's credit assessment of a handful of MOOC courses, making recommendations for credit. And I think the other significant part of that will be if you pay, and I think, John, we were in agreement with that. Once you start adding a financial element, this now starts to take on all of the themes that we would typically play out for courses. And I think these are going to fall under heavy scrutiny, or scrutiny. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say heavy scrutiny. They're going to fall under some scrutiny. And I think they're going to be hard-pressed. I do think they're going to be hard-pressed to pass muster by most of, so take our quality scorecard off the table, just for a moment, not too far off the table. I think most accrediting associations would look at the standard MOOC and say there is insufficient engagement of faculty and student, there is insufficient support from a student services perspective, and if in fact you're going to be granting credit for this, those things probably are going to need to change. I think they're going to change. I mean, who knows how, we couldn't have predicted 2 years ago we would be spending so much time talking about MOOCs, or that we would have systems, public systems moving in this direction, which I think is intriguing. It'd be interesting to watch to see how all this plays out. I think ultimately MOOCs are in fact going to play out and start looking more and more like what we're already doing in a lot of our online activities, only broader. I've made this comment before. We've had MOOCs. Someone made a comment to me earlier today. We had MOOCs in the 60s and 70s. One of the best MOOCs ever was a program that PBS put out in the 80s called the Vietnam War. How did it work? PBS, every Monday night, you'd watch the next version, next chapter, next class of the Vietnam War series. Marvelously done, great production. And what did institutions do? Institutions then set up courses. It's a blended learning model. You distribute the content via PBS. You would then have students enrolling in courses. You'd meet with faculty. They would talk about things. They'd write papers. They'd do examinations. They gave credit for essentially the content coming from the public broadcasting service. It was a MOOC. We didn't call it that. We didn't call it that, but that is essentially what it was. But what did it do? It engaged the faculty. It engaged students with faculty. It was a blended concept, which we think is terrific. But it had some academic rigor to it. And most of the MOOCs at this present time don't. So people get all excited about, oh, we only got 7% of students completing. how many of the students, of the 240,000 that UVA enrolled, actually had the intent of wanting to complete the MOOC? Most of them didn't. And oh, by the way, if you were a UVA student, admitted, matriculated, you couldn't take the course for credit. They're working on that, but they're not at that point yet. That's why the USG initiative, the Georgia Tech initiative, I think, take on some added significance and intrigue to see how all of this, in fact, might play out. So I wandered a little bit away from your question, but hopefully I responded to it. Anything else? Any other questions? Any other comments? Going once? Going twice? Okay, listen, you were a great audience. I appreciate your patience and listening to my stories. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the conference tomorrow. Thanks.